water and it's filled with mattresses over at, yeah, where the Moore theater is. And it's got a full underground pool, but instead they fill it up with material from the hotel, all their spare mattresses they put in the hotel. So it's, but it says no diving.
We're not actually underground. Where we really are is down at the original level that the city of Seattle was first started. As Andy told you, when the Denny's landed here, well, Denny, Boren, Terry, and Bell and Lowe landed here in 1851, they found a small island in the tide flats. When Yesler arrived here in 1853 with his sawmill, that cranked out a lot of sawdust. They began to fill in around this small island with the sawdust. It pretty much came up to the level that we're at right now. This is a picture of what that original city looked like. This picture was taken in the early 1870s. This is First Avenue, which back then was called Commercial Street, and this is Yesler Way back here. So we crossed the street this way, then we crossed this way, came down the stairs. We are now down at the original level that this sidewalk was at back in the 1850s, 1870s. Two things you can tell by looking at this picture. This is only 20 years after the city was started. It's about 20 years before the fire burned to the ground. The city grew very quickly in its first 20 years. The other thing you can tell by looking at this picture is that everything was made out of wood. It was kind of haphazard construction. We had wooden houses on the hillside, wooden stores and offices down here, even wooden sidewalks, wooden planked sidewalks, and of course the whole town was sitting on a mixture of dirt and sawdust landfill. So I think you can tell that the place was a fire waiting to saw this thing catch on fire. What would be your first impulse?
Run.
Run? No. Well, this kid decided to throw a pail of water on it, which sounded like a good idea, except that caused the fire to spread to the floor, which is a wooden floor. It was soaked in turpentine. The entire store caught on fire, and then he did run. And the streets weren't draining off, and that's why we had those gigantic mud puddles that the kids and the horses were drowning in. So they proposed to solve both of these problems by bringing the rest of that dirt from the hillside down here, raising this area up so that the sewers would have a one-way square. And they built them 8 to 32 feet, depending on how high in the, where they wanted it to fit in with the slope. And then in between these walls, they put rocks and dirt and debris from the fire, anything they could get their hands on to fill in the space between the walls until they got to the top of the walls. They put the new sewer and water lines on top, and then they paved over in cobblestone or brick. So we had these wonderful elevated streets up here, and we had these beautiful new brick and stone buildings down here, but the sidewalks were still down here. Okay, did anybody see any the town looked like a great big waffle iron.
They're chasing a rat back. They're chasing a rat back.
If I can get everybody to squeeze in here, I'm gonna, once I get everybody in, I'm gonna turn the lights on.
This explains a lot.
Yeah, did you notice that before?
Yes.
That's right. Hey, I saw you rapping on those metal pipes. Do you know that sometime here was this business right here? This was the Scandinavian American Bank. They made out very well from the Alaskan gold rush. What they did was a process called mining the miners. That's what they use in the glass. And then, and yeah, when the sun hits that over the years, here's the tower gauge over here. Right. You can head straight through the end of the block. You're in the vault now. And if you look to the left as you go past that light, you'll see the stairs that led up to the original bank. This is the teller cage over here. You can see if your ATM card works in here. This is the vault behind these couple doors. In case you didn't think they were solid. Can you imagine working in this place? Taking people's money, and back then it was a little bit lighter. They had the skylight bulb. Now the skylight. And then they would take your money and they'd throw it back here in the horn back in that area. If anybody has any questions about the construction of the retaining walls or anything that you've seen down here, this is a good time to ask.
I see they keep shoring them up recently.
Oh, yeah, they keep shoring them up. How do you like that? Yeah, a lot of people ask. Okay, we're going to be... Okay, after everybody's had kind of a chance to look around, I wish I could tell you get to sit down over there, but that's not really, the tour actually is over here. And the only reason I say that is because I'll be talking over here, and halfway through people will realize, hey, I can't hear them. They'll all stand up at once, and I hear creak, 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 and then go. Where's the YMCA? Did you ask that? Is that Seattle? What town? You're from Toronto too? You're from history here in Seattle. I don't know, Annie didn't tell you much about our seamstresses, did she? Okay, well this is sort of a family tour, but I think you guys are mostly adults, I can tell this story. Back before the fire, Seattle didn't have much of a tax base back in the 1870s. They needed to raise some money to do some street improvements. And so they sent out a business and occupation survey to find out who was living here and what they were doing for a living so that they could tax them. All right, the surveys came back, and that's when we found out that we had about 25,000 people, which was kind of a surprise. We didn't know that the city had grown that much. Of course, there's 500,000 people here today. But what really surprised them now, about 90% of those people, they were young, hard-working single men who listed their occupation as mill worker or logger, which was no big surprise. We had Henry Yesler's mill and all those trees they were cutting down. But the real surprise was that fully 10%, or 2,512 of these people, were young, hard-working single women who all listed their occupation as seamstress or garment worker. Very suspicious. And all but 6 of them listed their address as this one 3-block section of Occidental Avenue. They were all living in the same street. Wow, the city scratched their heads. They knew we had all these loggers and miners. They had no idea we had such an extensive garment district. Okay, so like any good city would do, they formed a committee to explore the seamstress phenomenon. About 100 young men from Henry Yesler's sawmill volunteered to be on this committee. Only 6 were selected. They hot-footed it down here to Occidental Avenue. And after 3 weeks of what they termed exhaustive research, can you believe they were not able to turn up a single sewing machine in the entire neighborhood? Of course, you've already figured it out. Vice and prostitution were running rampant in this area. And when the city fathers found this out, they were flabbergasted. They wanted to run this bad element out of town. But of course, the sons of the prophets were in charge. And they said, let's not be so hasty. Maybe there's some money to be made here. They approached some of these industrious ladies, and these women said, you know, we kind of like it here in Seattle, and we'd like to stay, and we're willing to pay our share. So through a complex series of taxes, fines, and licenses, they came up with kind of this seamstress tax that amounted to $10 per seamstress per month per sewing machine. And however, and through that and the taxes on the illegal bootlegging and gambling that was going on down here in this area, they managed to raise 87% of the city's operating budget for the next 4 years. So I think you can tell that Henry Yesler's mill was no longer the largest employer in town. We had become the entertainment capital of the Northwest, and gave rise to a very popular slogan of the day: a stitch in time will cost you $2. Oh, you heard it. He's never going to let us out. You know, you have to buy the book here to get this. Before we do, some of you may have noticed there's some old pieces of skylight hanging around in this area here. More skylights above our head here. These are not the